So it turns out that this guy, and this guy have a lot more in common than you might have known. Let's check it out. Lately, I've been obsessed with Yu-Gi-Oh! It all started when I learned that you could put Legacy of the Duelist on the Switch if you have the Japanese eShop, months before the game drops here in the US. Instantly, it was like a trip right back into my childhood. I loved the original show, and I played the game competitively during some of the earliest tournament formats. But Legacy of the Duelist let me dig up nearly 15 years of the game's history that I missed out on growing up. Soon, I was watching old seasons of the show, going through all my old cards to make a cube draft, I'm checking out structure decks, I'm opening reissued packs of sets from my childhood. Oh, we got a Jinzo, baby! You know how there's a mobile game based on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game? Well, it turns out that there's a card game based on that mobile game. I was digging deep into the Yu-Gi-Oh! Lore, and just like the archaeologists who discovered the Millennium items in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Story, when you dig deep enough, you can find some pretty crazy stuff. Here was my descent into darkness. Top floor, you got the 4Kids English anime, which is the only Yu-Gi-Oh! Story most people that I know have seen. The show is known for its almost comical levels of censorship, from finger guns to the Shadow Realm to the removal of any religious symbols to the cover-up of anything remotely sexual. So the English anime is a toned-down version of the Japanese anime. But it turns out that the Japanese anime is a toned-down version of the first Japanese anime. This gets a little confusing, but in 1998, there was a one-season anime by Studio Toei simply titled Yu-Gi-Oh! The Yu-Gi-Oh! Show that we know in America first released in 2000 in Japan by Studio Gallop. In Japan, this second show was called Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. To distinguish the two in English, a lot of fans commonly nickname this first series as Season 0. The first production of the show is famous for its wider focus on games and the much crueler and more punishing version of Dark Yu-Gi. I could stop and just talk about Season 0, but today we're actually digging one level even deeper, because it turns out that even Season 0 is a toned-down version of the original source material. We got the OG Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga. Written by Kazuki Takahashi and first published by Weekly Shonen Jump in 1996, this is a dark tale of violence, games, and judgment. It's so many steps removed from the neutered show that I grew up with that it feels like a completely different story. Shockingly, the Viz Media English localization of the manga is extremely light on censorship this time around. And it's pretty damn good! Okay, some quick manga stuff before we get started. I'm going to be using the Japanese names for these characters since that's what they use even in the English manga. Also, the version of this story that I read was the Viz Media 3-in-1 volume packs that you can see here. If you're interested in buying this manga and want to help support the show, I'm going to leave an Amazon referral link in the description below. The images from the manga that I'll be using today are from the more recent Japanese Bunko digitally colorized manga. These look extremely good, and I hope that someday they'll see an English release in the future. The phrase Yu-Gi-Oh! In Japanese literally translates to King of Games, and that's exactly what our hero becomes. The manga follows the real-life theme of some of the earliest games known to mankind being discovered in Egypt. When Yugi solves the ancient Egyptian Millennium Puzzle, he inherits the soul of an ancient guardian who passes judgment on the evil. The first 7 volumes of the manga are what most would consider classic Yu-Gi-Oh! These all follow a similar chapter-by-chapter formula. Yugi and his friends find interest in a game or activity, someone evil exploits or cheats in that activity, and then Dark Yugi appears to challenge the perpetrator to a shadow game of his own design. When the evildoer is defeated, they're given a cruel punishment that fits their crimes. One of the most interesting parts of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga is that it has a massive variety of gaming inspirations to make up its scenarios. There are chapters or arcs dedicated to Dungeons and Dragons, arcade games, yo-yos, Tamagotchi card games, and of course, even a gashapon chess game, complete with polls that vary in rarity from 1 to 5 stars.
Fire Emblem Heroes!
He's the king of games, not the king of cards. Also, fun fact, the original title for this card game in the manga, before it was changed to Duel Monsters, was Wizards and Magic. It's literally a Magic the Gathering parody. A big thing that makes this Yu-Gi-Oh! So dark compared to the Yu-Gi-Oh! That I know is the punishment. The only dark Yugi punishments that I remember growing up were the occasional mind crush. But this Yugi has an entire arsenal of ways to humiliate and beat down the evil people that cross him. Our first victim tries to extort Yugi for cash, and so Dark Yugi throws him into illusion that drives him insane, making him think that he's rolling around in piles of money. He's found the next morning rolling in leaves and garbage. And compared to the rest of them, he got off easy. For example, during the duel with Kaiba, Yugi turns him into a trading card and forces him to feel the sensation of death at the hands of the game's monsters in their world. And while humiliation through illusion is a tool that Dark Yugi uses, he usually prefers extreme violence. There's poison stings, electrocutions, explosions, lighting people on fire, lighting people on fire, lighting people on He just really wants to watch the world burn, okay? These are all bad people who deserve the punishment, but seeing Yugi act as an executioner so frequently throughout the manga is just wild compared to what I used to know. Another thing that isn't quite the Yu-Gi-Oh that I know is the Perv Factor. It only takes like 5 pages into the first chapter to find Yugi imagining Anzu's panties if she played basketball while wearing a skirt. This is a very different Yugi. Later we see Grandpa commenting on how she's grown up and comments on her bust size. The next chapter we see Junichi complaining about the censorship mosaics in his porn. There's this thing in the background, the panty tank. Someone tries to use chloroform on Anzu. Yugi ogles Anzu's quote-unquote dynamite body. There's a weird groping machine? What the? Man, it has gotta suck to be the one girl in a shonen manga. These moments aren't super common, and they definitely do die down as the story continues, but they threw me off. The English anime and cards are so prude, they want to pretend that cleavage doesn't even exist. So even that small jump from Babyland to T for Teen Land can feel like a giant leap. But I think by far the biggest thing that shocks me when reading this is the violence. Like, yeah, Yugi kills people, but they usually die off screen or in one shot. But there is a significant amount of bloody and brutal fistfighting throughout the whole story. Broken jaws, teeth getting knocked out, hands getting impaled. This is intense. But nobody gets a beatdown like Yugi. Lil Yugi is constantly getting his ass whooped. I started counting, and over half of the first couple volumes feature stories where this kid gets punched in the face. It's just non-stop. And boy, have we moved up from the finger guns. There are weapons everywhere. Tons of guns, multiple serial killers, tasers. Everyone has a knife. He's got a knife, he's got a knife, Yugi's got a knife. Freaking Mokuba?
And let me see what you have. No!
Like I mentioned, the first 7 volumes of Yu-Gi-Oh! Play out in this dark but passionate love letter to all things gaming. The original English printing of these volumes was simply titled Yu-Gi-Oh! But starting with volume 8, things start to change. The manga starts to line up with the storylines we know from the anime, and card games completely take over. Between Duelist Kingdom and Battle City, more than 20 of the next consecutive volumes are entirely about the Duel Monsters card game. Okay, almost entirely. In English, this huge block is called YuGiOh Duelist. Now, they might be card game arcs, but they do still have that classic manga edge to them. Tons of characters actually die during Duelist Kingdom, including Bandit Keith being forced to shoot himself in the head after being caught cheating, or Pegasus having the Millennium Eye graphically removed from his face. Oh, God, ew. Licking the blood off of it. That boy ain't right. But regardless, it's definitely jarring to go to only card games after reading those first couple volumes. Almost all of the rest of Yu-Gi-Oh! And its expanded universe is trading cards. Cards have become the brand's identity. I started searching for an answer, trying to find out why this series went from all games to just one game in such a sudden way. The author constantly talks between the chapters about the different games he loves, citing his absolute favorite as tabletop role-playing games. Every single chapter of the manga even comes with a little do-it-yourself board game that you can play, full of different rules and genres. So with all this variety, why only cards? Kazuki Takahashi doesn't speak to the press that much, but I finally got my answer in the Time magazine interview dating all the way back to 2001. Originally, I'd planned to phase out the card game in 2 episodes, but the reader response we got was enormous. Shonen Jump started getting calls from all these kids who wanted to know more about the game, how to play it, where they could get it. At the time, kids didn't really play card games. They were way into video games. But it's much more thrilling to battle against a human being while looking them in the eye than playing with a machine. I realized I'd hit on something, so I began to concentrate on the card game. Another important part to this story is Takahashi's career. He wanted to write manga professionally, but he wasn't able to break into the business for over a decade. After all those years of waiting, those 2 card game chapters finally helped him find an angle to success for the first time. I definitely can't blame him for running with it. Card games or no card games, I still really love Yu-Gi-Oh! After all these years. Sure, this version is lewd, it's crude, and it's got one mean dude, but the old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga is full of more stories with the same great characters I grew up with on the TV. As someone who has also walked a life full of different types of games, from the tables to the screens, it's been a blast going through this little chapter before Yu-Gi-Oh! Became all about the heart of the cards. And that isn't where the story ends. Takahashi might have gotten swept up in card game mania in the middle, but he got to end Yu-Gi-Oh! On his own terms. The final 7 volumes close out Yugi's original story. In English, they were titled YuGiOh The Millennium World. If you've seen the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, you might have noticed a lot less card games in the show's final arcs. But one thing the anime doesn't really capture well is the final shadow game of the story. Here in the manga, it's a massive tabletop Dungeons & Dragons style campaign between Yugi and Bakura. Despite creating a story that kickstarted one of the world's most popular games, I find it fitting that Takahashi got to give us another look at his personal favorite game before the end.